Hey, good evening, everybody. Huge thank you for tuning in. So, Kevin again has got huge news to announce regarding the case against Pope Leo and other co conspirators. We're going to be asking him about the verdict, the evidence uncovered, how he plans to enforce the verdict and sentence against the 13 defendants, who include King Charles, Trump, head of NATO, Pope Leo, etc., enforcing the verdicts. And we'll also be talking about the recent unaliving of Mormon leader Russell Nelson, the Charlie Kirk conspiracy, because of course that happened in Utah, and Kevin has linked them together. And then we've got the assassination of priest Joe Moreno in Buffalo, New York, that there's a theory was ordered by Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who is also one of the defendants. So these are the subjects we are going to be going over this evening. And I know loads of you are going to have questions for Kevin. If you want to just put them in the chat anytime, and we will get those questions to him once we've gone over all of the main headlines. So huge thank you for coming on again, Kevin, and all of Kevin's links are in the description box below this video.
Hi, Sean. It's good to be back, and especially since tomorrow the verdict from the Common Law Court is coming out. And once again, we've decided to choose your show to break the news. So this is going out tomorrow morning all over the world. And if folks recall, the court was convened a month ago, and it's issued the summonses to all of the people you mentioned and the others. Murderbydecree.com, just go to ITCCS updates. You'll see the recent postings about that. In a nutshell, what's happened was, it's interesting. This will all be posted tomorrow. There have been some really interesting things that have happened. First of all, September 8th, the summonses went out to these people. The prosecution has spent the whole summer working with me and a whole raft of new eyewitnesses who've come forward, including insiders. And it was interesting because in the course of this, two people came forward who were defendants. And these people were Keith Schiller, who's the former bodyguard to Trump, and a guy called Gary Patterson, who is formerly head of the United Church of Canada. They both wanted to strike a deal to provide information on the others in return for amnesty. Well, the judges looked at that and realized, based on the prosecutor's evidence, that both of these guys had been involved in Ninth Circle ceremonies and the deaths of children themselves. So they didn't grant them amnesty, but they enjoined them under the law to release what they knew, and they did. And that's one of the reasons we have some of this even more damning evidence. These are from insiders, don't forget. Keith Schiller was present at various rituals that occurred in the Epstein apartment in the spring of 1999, in which Trump was present. And Gary Patterson himself is a member of what's called, on the west coast of Canada, the 12 Mile Club. He was actually faced indictment by the police, but then it got thrown out in trafficking children and in the deaths of children. So these are people with blood on their hands, but you can see this success and impact this is having when they're beginning to break ranks like that, because that never happened before. In our previous common law court cases, you didn't see this happening. And the other really exciting thing is that law enforcement agencies from at least 3 countries have now volunteered to help enforce these warrants. They've actually want to set up something called an international law enforcement command, whereby they can actually go into the countries and make these arrests. So we get around, do an end run around that problem politically of how do you get the police and the courts and the government to make these arrests. This group will have international power to do that. And that's a really exciting development because it means we can actually stop these things from happening. So I'm going to get into that. But let me just summarize the salient points of the background and then the verdict, which I'll describe. First time today, the world will hear it. Over the first 3 weeks of September, the prosecution laid out its whole case to the court. And that included things like that log from the Vatican Library showing these 12 Ninth Circle ceremonies going back to the year 1869. Affidavits, eyewitness testimonies. Eyewitnesses appeared in front of the magistrates and shared their story. Videotaped evidence from these ceremonies, so it actually shows the very grisly events of when these children are ritually killed, torn apart, cannibalized. That's all on video and photographic evidence, which the court has and will be sharing with other courts and governments around the world. During that time as well, some new evidence came out of America, which was linking especially Trump, the Pope, Robert Prevost, and a guy called Cardinal Timothy Dolan. And this ties in the whole Charlie Kirk and the head of the Mormon church, Russell Nelson, who just died the same day that a Mormon church in Michigan was shot up and 4 people were killed as a standard kind of distraction event to draw away from the fact that Russell Nelson, Charlie Kirk, these things are all connected. And it has to do with the role the Vatican Bank is playing now, shifting a lot of the money to China. And Russell Nelson didn't want the Mormon money to go that way. Don't forget, the Mormon church has assets almost equaling that of the Vatican Bank, $165 billion in assets. And there was a whole move afoot to move that money into the BRIC Alliance. Nelson opposed it, he dies, but also he had knowledge of what had happened to Charlie Kirk, because don't forget, in the last broadcast and in the other postings we've done, a lot of evidence, including from Keith Schiller and other sources within Interpol and within the US, show that Charlie Kirk knew about and was about to comment on Trump's involvement in the deaths of a number of people, including Virginia Giuffre, these Deutsche Bank officers, Valentin Bruckschmidt and Thomas Bowers, who knew about the illegal loans to the Trump International from the bank. And they were going to the FBI with this evidence. They both conveniently die. And also this fellow, Reverend Joe Moreno, of Buffalo, New York. For years, he was an honest priest who had gathered evidence of child trafficking all through the Buffalo diocese, which is heavily tied into the mafia. He was killed on a kill order from Cardinal Timothy Dolan, one of the defendants. Now, don't forget, Dolan is close to Trump. Trump wanted to put him in as Pope, and instead Prevost was put in by the Chinese interests. And he was going to go, this Joe Moreno had all of this evidence. He was going to the FBI, and he was going to the papal nuncio at the time in Washington with all of this evidence. Dolan's associate hears him say, that priest is not going to live out the week. Sure enough, he's found dead in his church office, this Joe Moreno, with 2 bullet holes in the back of the head. Police say it's suicide. You know, and it's interesting, those 2 bullets in the back of the head equaling suicide, which is physically impossible. That happened to a number of other people. It's a trademark sign. If you remember, there was a reporter who, Gary Webb, who brought out for the first time back in the 1980s the fact that the CIA was trafficking crack cocaine into America. He did a series of articles on that. He went through the ringer, got thrown out of his job, typical kind of blacklisting going on. Then he's found dead in his office with 2 bullets in the back of the head. So that's suggested that's a CIA calling card, right? When they do a black op, that's kind of, they leave their insignia by doing that. And it wouldn't, it kind of jives with the other things we've learned, that there was high level hit orders on these people. Now we have a whole list of other people, which you can read in the order tomorrow, or the verdict when it's posted tomorrow. A half a dozen other people in the Catholic Church around the Buffalo area, including Bishop Richard Malone and Edward Gross, a guy called Vicar David Lipuma. These people are all involved in killing off inconvenient clergy. And I think it's significant, Sean, that they don't just try to scare them into silence. They actually remove them. They kill them. And when people are being killed, it's an act of desperation. It means that they can't afford to have any of this information come out because it implicates Trump, the head of NATO, who we haven't talked about yet, but we'll get to, Mark Rutte, the Pope himself. So, when there's big money involved, big interests, they just get people out of the way. And that's, another example of that is evidence that came forward to the court has to do with a whole child trafficking pipeline into southern Ontario from Cleveland and Buffalo. And it services cities like Brantford, London, Hamilton, and Toronto, Ontario. Don't forget, that's where we found a lot of the evidence of children's mass graves at residential schools. And this implicates directly Charles Windsor, Andrew Windsor, Timothy Dolan, and archbishops in the Church of England, Justin Welby and Fred Hiltz, and this former moderator, Gary Patterson of the United Church, who wanted to make a deal because he knew this stuff was coming out and his fingerprints are all over it. Moving down the list, the guilt of the guy we just mentioned, NATO chief Mark Rutte, and the Vatican cardinals Pietro Parolin and Reinhard Marx, and also the Pfizer CEO Alfred Bourla. This stuff came from right within Interpol and Ninth Circle and corporate sources in New York and Europe. And it turns out, this is a really interesting side story, kind of funny in a way. The Chinese government pressured Cardinal Parolin. Now, don't forget, he was Secretary of State. He's like the top cardinal in Rome, Pietro Parolin, and he expected to get in as Pope. And the Chinese pressured him to manipulate Mark Rutte as head of NATO, because don't forget, for many years, Mark Rutte had been reported as a Ninth Circle participant. Our eyewitnesses in Europe, Toos Nieuwenhuis and Henri van Beenberg, they both saw him in Ninth Circle rituals when he was president of the Netherlands. Back in 2023, he suddenly gets dumped as president and he shows up as head of NATO. Well, China saw this as a great opportunity to derail NATO, and so Parolin has threatened Mark Rutte with exposure. He has photographic evidence of him participating in the Ninth Circle ritual killing of children. And a similar blackmailing had been done successfully against the head of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, because the Vatican Bank is gobbling up big pharma corporations all over the world, and it was one of their ways to lever themselves into Pfizer to blackmail Albert Bourla, which apparently worked. And so, anyway, this is some of the examples of the kind of the sordid, stuff that surfaces when you start exposing this stuff. And just running down the list, I think I already mentioned about the Mormon Church and Charlie Kirk's death. And the other thing about Kirk and Trump is that he was a confidant of Trump, and just like Keith Schiller knew about Trump's presence at these ceremonies. We have 983 pages of documents detailing all this stuff, and it's going to be shared with government, the media all over the world, but also it indicates that these tentacles extend in areas like Australia too. One of our people in Australia, who is a great researcher and activist, Georgina Cameron, was killed for highlighting and uncovering the fact that there were Ninth Circle ceremonies going on right in Wollongong, Australia. This guy, Bishop Brian Mascord of the Lumen Christi Catholic Church, is involved in a whole trans-Pacific arm of the Ninth Circle, which extends to Shanghai, China, and the west coast of the US and Canada. And what's interesting is he's working with a guy called Ian Benson, who's a professor at Notre Dame University in Sydney, and a member of Opus Dei and Santa Alianza. And as a matter of fact, this guy, I couldn't believe it when she mentioned this. This is the very same guy, the Catholic Church lawyer, who was hired by the United Church of Canada to get rid of me back in 1996 and 97. And I'm thinking, like, why is the same guy operating on two sides of the Pacific? Turns out, inadvertently, I had uncovered early on in my work with Native people, unbeknownst to myself, I had uncovered this whole Pacific network, child trafficking network that goes on involving China. We know China has been very heavily involved in the disappearance of Native people all over northern Canada. Turns out, this guy is a link to that. And so these folks are going to be subjects of future court cases, because so much has been brought out by, the further we dug, all of this stuff came up. And the final thing on that I want to say, we can open it up, is as part of this judgment of the court, several groups have already endorsed it. Like, for example, the Chilcotin Indigenous Nation in Canada have already endorsed the judgment of the court and said they're going to help enforce it. So any of these people on their territory, they're going to arrest with their warrior societies. The Republic of Canada is going to pass enabling legislation allowing these court verdicts to be applied anywhere in the territory of Canada, which is all of Canada. And like I mentioned before, this International Law Enforcement Command of military and paramilitary and police in a number of countries, 3 of them so far, have agreed to help enforce this warrant. Now, I have my bodyguard, Joseph, to thank for that in a way, because he has connections with these agencies in Europe, and he helped broker all that. People are realizing, and governments are realizing, it's time to move on this stuff. And so that's the background. Now, let me just read the the thing you've been waiting for, which is the actual judgment and sentence of the court. And this is going to be announced publicly later today and tomorrow. I'll read it out. After a thorough examination of the evidence, the magistrates of the court have come to a unanimous verdict. The court finds all 13 of the primary defendants guilty as charged of complicity in crimes against humanity, murder, and participating in the trafficking and ritual rape, torture, and murder of children. 2, this is interesting, by a majority opinion, the court sentences all of the defendants in absentia to imprisonment for life without the possibility of parole and the forfeiture of their assets and authority. But in a dissenting opinion, 2 of the court magistrates state that the death penalty is required in the sentencing of those defendants who bear command responsibility for Ninth Circle atrocities. In other words, they were the head of it and they ordered it, and who have also personally participated. These 5 defendants, who 2 of them dissent, and point 3, as part of the sentence and under law, the following government officials are hereby stripped of their authority in public office. The citizens, police, and public officials of their countries are absolved of all allegiance towards them, and they must aid in their arrest and imprisonment. And those convicted felons are Donald Trump, President of the United States, Charles Windsor, King Charles III of Great Britain, and Mark Rutte, Secretary General of NATO. And as part of the enforcement of that, the court authorizes the immediate arrest and incarceration of all of those defendants. It is issuing a universal arrest and reclamation warrant, which empowers anyone in the world and court sheriffs, any police officer, to detain and incarcerate any of the convicted defendants and seize their assets and the properties of their associated bodies, like the Catholic Church and so on. And finally, under international law, the criminal conviction of these heads of state and church render their powers null and void under the law. It therefore makes the Church of Rome, the Vatican, the United States of America, and the Crown of England, Great Britain, they constitute rogue regimes under international law. And in the past, they've referred to countries like Libya under Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein as rogue regimes. Well, in fact, under the law, the table has now been turned and said these nations proven, regimes that commit genocide and their heads of state are acting in a criminal role. The people of the world and the governments of the world have an obligation to declare these regimes rogue, and that means bring them to justice, impose economic sanctions and boycotts, and any other means necessary. And that's the point I want to end on. The people of the world are authorized to take any measures now to defend the lives of children. And we're going to see that happening through this law enforcement command that's going to operate all over the world now to enforce all that. So let me stop at that, and I'll give my voice a rest.
Wow, phenomenal, Kevin. Phenomenal result. Congratulations. And I'm sure the viewers have got tons of questions. So please put your questions in the chat. I know some have come in already. But I'd just like to confirm a few things that Kevin touched on there. Trump came in and he said he was going to release the Epstein files, was going to end the wars, etc. Another thing they said was they were going to go after Big Pharma. Well, my background is in the stock market. I've been trading it since I was a kid. I was a stockbroker in America before I went off the rails, and I still follow it to this day.
I can tell by your tie.
Anyway, in the last week, I've watched Merck stock price, Eli Lilly stock price, and Pfizer stock price shoot up at record speed, adding billions of dollars in market capitalization to those companies. And that was on the back of one of the primary things. It was on the back of a huge announcement by Trump and Pfizer, whereby they're giving Pfizer 70 million of your taxpayers' dollars. Made it sound like they were helping the public, getting prices down, etc. But it's just an absolute handover of taxpayers' money to Big Pharma. Now, the other thing Kevin touched on was the Gary Webb story. So I wrote a book called Clinton, Bush, and CIA Conspiracies, which was the stories of 4 people, interweaving stories of 4 people. One of them was Gary Webb. Another one was Linda Ives, mother of one of the boys on the tracks victims. And yeah, Gary Webb, he'd exposed how the CIA was bringing kilos of the white stuff in. Air America, Barry Seal, for example, Southern Air Transport, these were the CIA airlines. And Gary Webb, he was at the forefront of really exposing this to a lot of people. And like Kevin said, he was found unalived. They said he unalived himself. He'd managed to do that twice. Boom, boom, twice in his own head. And Kevin has also talked about that happening to somebody else earlier
Joe
on. So
Moreno.
it is,
Joe
it is,
Moreno.
it is a classic. You know, they leave the hallmark of these intelligence agency assassins, leave these tells, and that's a classic tell. So I'll start to go to a couple of the questions then. I mean, my first question, Kevin, is because we've got 2,000 people watching us now, and not many as many were watching at the beginning. And one of the huge things that you said was that some of the people who are on the indictment have flipped. Could you just reiterate that and how that came about and how useful that information is?
Oh, it's tremendously helpful. The people are Keith Schiller, who is not only former bodyguard for Trump, but he was head of all security for the Oval Office in Trump's first term. And he was privy to, like chief of staff in the White House. I mean, they know all of the dirt. And I'm surprised Schiller's still walking around, right? In a way, like I'm surprised I'm still walking around. But the point is that these guys see which way the wind is blowing quicker than other people do because they know the direction of things, right? They know that Trump's in his final days. This whole thing is coming down. And geopolitically, with war on the horizon, you know, naming the head of NATO as a child killer, they can't ignore something like that. And so these people, you tend to find the squealers are the ones at a lower level. The people in the highest region, they think they're gods. They think, and they know the laws, they're above the law and they can't touch them. So they're not going to strike a deal. There's no need to at this point. They'll kind of blow later, you know, when everything else changes. But the people at the bottom aren't as convinced. We find this with like native sellouts all the time in Canada, the native politicians. They know they can get dumped in a minute, so they tend to rat out others. And you're finding the same thing happen here. And as for Gary Patterson, I mean, I've had personal encounter with this guy because he helped engineer my expulsion from the United Church when we first began to bring this stuff out in the 90s. And I remember once we did a protest at his church, St. Andrew's Wesley, in United Church in downtown Vancouver. Bingo Dawson, one of our brothers who got killed, had just led a protest there. And that's him. And Gary Patterson went up to Bingo. He's this homeless Native man who had the courage to stand up against this church publicly. And Gary Patterson went up to Bingo and said, "You're not going to live out the week. Count on it." Took a few more weeks, but Bingo was found murdered in an alley. Police beat him to death, right? And that's right after he had led an occupation of Patterson's church. So these guys don't mess around, and they don't want the extent of what they've done coming out because it's so horrible. And with the solid proof of photographic evidence now and video evidence, it's even I couldn't watch this stuff. It's you know, it's beyond belief to watch this happen. You know, the evisceration of live children and all of these people taking great delight in doing it, right? When the world comes awake of what they're involved in, you know, what they've been part of, they're going to revolt. And of course, you know, that's what these elites are realizing now, that they're sitting on a big powder keg and it's blowing as we speak. So.
All right, so we've got a question from Jeannie. How can the court adjudicate it that quickly and we don't get to see the questioning?
Well, first of all, don't forget, you need to know some of the background of this. This stuff has already been adjudicated. It's already been adjudicated on 2 different occasions with these people and with the institutions. So we already had a lot of the evidence. We had a whole crop of new eyewitnesses. We had a concern to not drag this out because the chance of the witnesses disappearing and, you know, other people going missing increases with every day you do this. Don't forget there'd been an attack on 2 of the judges, physical assaults, that we had faced major cyber attack. We were worried about, you know, the time was clicking by and we had to get this stuff out quick. Also, weren't able to watch it live because of anonymity. We could not expose the names of the judges or the prosecutor or many of these eyewitnesses that will come out. And as part of the verdict, it says in there that all of this stuff is held in public trust, all of the evidence. It will be brought out. But as I mentioned, there's other cases that are coming out of this. And if we release stuff too prematurely, it's going to endanger that case. It's going to expose the people doing it. And, so solid reasons that it happened the way it did. 30 days is a long time to go over, the extent of what was presented. And so, yeah, I mean, the early case against Ratzinger did take over 6 months, but we had hit them kind of out of the blue. They weren't prepared for what had happened any more than when we revealed the stuff in Canada. But now they know how to react quicker. So we recognize that. We've got that from people on the inside, that they were mounting a big shutdown of the court. So we had to get it out quick while we were still walking around. Right?
So people are wondering about enforcement and compliance with this. And Tracy is just saying, what if everyone who is due to get arrested refuse arrest?
Then we get arrested anyway. I mean, that's the point. And it's also important to recognize that everyone watching this has a role to play in this. Now, no one by themselves is going to go on up and arrest these people, but don't forget, there's professionals who are now ready to do that, and they need the help of the public. Most importantly, you can start the process by letting people know this, letting everyone who walks into a Catholic church know that they're complicit in a crime. And if you put money in that collection plate or support it, you're endorsing these terrible crimes against children. So vote with your feet, stay away. That's what they worry about anyway, these people. Your non-participation. That's the best way you can participate in that. We know it's working. I mean, I gave you the example of all these Catholic churches, including in Ireland and Quebec, where you go in on a Sunday morning, there's only 50 people sitting there, or 30, right? And so this is having a long-term impact. And, thanks to the exposure in here and this book, this solid information to get out to people, it's going to percolate upwards. It already is. And the problem is people tend to think in very short-term ways, right? If it's not going to happen, in a month, then it's not real, right? That isn't, just measure what's happened over 10 or 20 years with this stuff, right? And you'll see the impact it has. It's tremendous. So their refusal to be arrested, they're not going to, because they know they're guilty. Why do you think Ratzinger hung out in the Vatican till the day he died? Because they know he could face arrest under international arrest warrants, which are still standing. So this has been a long process, and they know that the wind's now moving against them, right?
So, Agent Orange, if there's a successful Article 25 against Trump, and then would Vance still be able to run an additional 2 terms?
I don't know. Don't forget they change the rules to match whatever they want. Like they can change, they've been ignoring the Constitution actively. I mean, I heard one of the sources we have in Interpol said, all the legal systems now, including in America with its strong common law tradition, they're now changing the rules of evidence to say, well, hearsay isn't hearsay. You can have hearsay evidence and can still be admitted. Hello? That goes against any notion of due process to say, hey, I heard this about someone. Okay, good. That's solid evidence. I mean, since when? But you see, the law and politics, it's just manipulated by the wealthy and powerful few in their interest. And that's why we're building the alternative common law system outside that, because it's the only thing that's an honest legal system anymore. Everything else is being corrupted. I think we all know that from experience, right?
So TB is wondering how this will affect the UK and our politics here. And let me just add, things are getting crazier by the week here, Kevin. We've got 13,000 people now have been arrested for social media posts.
Right.
And Starmer just announced we're all having a digital ID, ostensibly to stop illegal migrants getting jobs, which is a ridiculous thing to say because that's a cash economy. But actually, it's got to have a bank account, to travel, to have a job, etc. We're all going to have a digital ID. So it seems that politics here, it's just all some agenda that the public are completely against, and they're forcing it down our throats.
Well, Sean and everybody watching this, it's more proof of a bigger issue here. And that's, to quote Abraham Lincoln, we're now in a state of civil war. And it's the people versus the corporatocracy. And in the Civil War, you don't play by the rules of peacetime. You recognize we're under a different regime altogether. And now it's time to fight because our backs are against the wall. And a lot of people know that now, and it's expressed in these huge demonstrations and that. But on the ground, you've got to, first of all, connect with people who are working outside the system, like our common law republics. In England, they just set up the Republic of Albion. We're setting up cells all over. Not big assemblies yet because it's too obvious. It brings too much repression, but cells of people who support each other, defend each other, and approach the local police when they're off duty and say, look, switch sides here. You've got to be on the side of the people. And that's repression is not something we want to keep from people because repression opens their eyes. We want people to go through these things because then they realize, okay, we're under attack. We can't live under this illusion that, that certain tinkering reforms will go back to the way things were. Things are over. We're in a new regime and we need to learn to fight. And these common law court precedents are a springboard to doing that. And so it's part of that bigger fight. And republicofalbion.com, contact those folks. And when I was held up in North America to do this work in the American end of the case, and because of the Joe Moreno evidence and all that. But hopefully very soon, if not by the spring at the latest, I'll be in Europe. And my objective is, along with a lot of other people who are enforcing this, will be to work with folks like you to build up that domestic resistance so that we can survive what's coming down, right?
Yep. So Knott's Lass, King Charles was mentioned. So what media outlets, newspaper will cover your verdict and information? I think Knott's Lass is referring to mainstream media. Will they report this, or are they all just one click?
They will report it in order to ridicule it, but eventually they will report it because don't forget, in Canada, the way it worked is for years they denied it. Then they tried to disparage what we're doing and they couldn't anymore. So now they co-opted it. And now they're taking, oh yeah, genocide happened. Oh yeah, children died. But boom, they spin it in a direction. And they'll eventually do that. Maybe Charles will abdicate, who knows, and then bring in a bright-faced new guy or whatever. Like they always tinker around to make it look like they're on the right side, but that tends to be the pattern. We know how they operate. We can maneuver around that. The Sean Average Show is mentioning this, and it's got a big reach. And you guys are all responsible now to take this and be your own media and get it out there and stop looking at the bad guys and look at ourselves and what we're going to do next, right?
Daily Mindset is asking whether King Charles has an alliance with Islam to divide this nation.
I don't know. I don't know the details of whether that's true or not. But don't forget that those terms are for the masses. Religion, politics, titles. That's to keep us all befuddled, Don't forget.
To keep us all divided and conquered, I believe. All right, so Faith wants to know, are we or any country ruled by ourselves and our own system if our leaders are step by step filling a blueprint laid out by the world's top billionaires? And
you're part of that.
Think of
yeah. No, go ahead, Sean.
Well, sometimes you think of individual billionaires, puppet masters, but Kevin's talking about institutions which are comprised of way more wealth and history and have way more power than individual billionaires, don't they?
Like the Vatican Bank, 80% of the world's assets, right? Follow the money. Oof. And leaders, figureheads come and go. They're the hand puppets meant to distract you and get everyone so upset. What happens to individuals, what we do, you got to be seen in the bigger context, like you said, right? You will be owned by that system as long as you participate in it. So step out. There's a lot of people online who are describing ways you can do that individually. We're describing how you do that as well collectively within your own, form a local assembly, pass your own laws, declare your independence from the system. We all need to do that personal and collective declaration of independence again, right?
And don't forget, all of the links to Kevin's books and other links are in the description box below this video, folks. So please support his important work. Peggy wants to know, how willing would J.D. Vance be to fill government positions with Opus Dei people?
Well, they're already in those positions, and it isn't just Opus Dei. I mean, there's, the cultic nature of government and police, why the FBI and CIA recruit so many Mormons, all of whom are card-carrying members of these satanic circles. I mean, it's part of the old boys club, right? So, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't he?
You're getting asked if you think the Charlie Kirk assassination was ritualistic.
I don't know. I don't have enough evidence about that. I do know it happened in Mormon territory, that a lot of the insiders, including the stuff Keith Schiller gave us, stuff Joseph and others have provided, show, yeah, definitely pointing in the direction of a joint operation between Santa Alianza, the Vatican Assassination Bureau, and the Danites, which is the Mormon equivalent, the people who get rid of inconvenient Mormons and others.
Yeah, there's so much additional information come out now to indicate that there's a huge conspiracy there. So, Irina, which persons are in the video footage, and would it not make all humanity aware of the extent of the issue if the footage were to be released to the public?
They're all in it. I mean, we gave an example earlier showing a younger Robert Prevost, present quote Pope Leo, shaking hands with John Paul II in the same week and we have that on film, of them ritually tearing apart this child and then consuming its remains. And two of our witnesses were present at that event. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that if you look at murderbydecree.com under ITCCS updates, you'll see a list of all 13 of the defendants. All of them are on film. Every single one of them were captured on film. Anyway, don't forget, when people are in the skeptical age of ours, someone will look at the film and go, oh, that's just doctored. They've just used AI technology to make it look like a child's being killed. Right? That's not real. It's never a question of evidence, it's a question of the mindset of the person. I don't want to believe it, therefore it doesn't exist. It's not a matter of your disbelief. It's a matter of when there's evidence, photographic evidence backed up with eyewitnesses who were there, backed up by documentary evidence showing this going on. Those are the only three things you need for conviction in a court of law, and we provided all three. Right?
Chris is wondering whether the videos will be released publicly.
That's the plan. If it doesn't jeopardize the safety of the witnesses and if it doesn't interfere with the upcoming cases we're planning. But don't forget, eventually we're working as well on a big documentary of all this. And when it's safe and the smoke is cleared, we're going to release it. And that's probably going to be the most powerful weapon in this arsenal we have. And in that regard, if there's anyone watching who knows professional filmmakers who are willing to take a risk, that can be helpful in the coming year.
Kenneth wants to know your view on the newly appointed female Archbishop of Canterbury.
Of course she's female. You got to clean up. After Justin Welby was found not only convicted time and again of these crimes, but friends with known child rapists. Of course you're going to bring in a woman as part of the window dressing, right? They did the same thing in Canada. They brought in an Aboriginal woman to be Governor General right after the stuff came out, right? And she flew out and helped cover up the murder of those 10 Cree people that Justin Welby was involved in. I mean, it's more distraction. Like a woman wouldn't lie to us, would she? It's like people are that gullible, right?
How does good triumph over evil at any time?
Through people's willingness to risk and go to the limit to save children's lives. I mean, at that moment, we've had a lot of moments where good triumphs over evil, but it's never permanent. It's that bigger philosophical question. You never get rid of good or evil. It's a continual dialectical kind of fight going on all the time. So, I mean, somebody who isn't Western trained, yin and yang people in the East understand that better, that there's a continual balance. The question is, when it gets out of balance, then the whole thing goes, and that's the situation we're in right now. But, there's always light at the end of the tunnel, but it's always a question of, are you willing to be part of that struggle for good and not just be a bystander, right?
Patrick's wondering whether Dolan was close to the Clintons.
As far as I know, he's had a long diplomatic relationship with numerous presidents, including Bill Clinton. Yeah. But Dolan is especially dirty. And that's because he personally takes great delight in these things. He's a very psychotic individual. And so, yeah, even more than the others, apparently.
Rachel, I've been seeing very large churches up for sale. Why are they selling these churches, and what are they doing with the money?
Well, partly it's to hide the assets. When you're facing court cases and more people are coming forward, you got to hide your assets. Same thing happened in Canada. All the churches, when we first triggered the first lawsuits against the Canadian churches for these residential school massacres, United Church, Catholic, Anglican, all of a sudden they moved out of their expensive offices, and you didn't know where they moved to, right? So yeah, it's also not just to hide the assets, but they are definitely not going bankrupt, because I can't imagine a multi-trillion-dollar organization like the Church of Rome going bankrupt. But what they do is they're under a lot of pressure now, like I said, to channel a lot of the assets towards China. There's this big global, battle. And that's the present guy. No, it wasn't. It was Francis. It was Bergoglio. Remember, he liquidated all these different Catholic agencies, Knights of Malta, and that he just grabbed their assets. Well, he was ordered to do that. I mean, that both he and the present guy are working to make sure that Chinese investments are protected all over the world. They underwrote them to $1 trillion a year in an agreement Bergoglio signed before he died. So, I mean, it's all part of that bigger thing, not just going broke, which they like to always talk about to get sympathy and legal support, right?
Yeah, and let me add to that also. So I knew a guy who was a victim of a Catholic priest, and in the legal disclosure, they had to give him all the properties that the Catholic Church owned within a certain area. This was Tucson, Arizona. It's like they owned houses on it nearly every street, because they were telling people, leave us your house, you can buy a place in heaven. And not only that, why don't you move into a one of these lovely Catholic care homes we've got right here, and we'll take possession of your house right away. But if you can imagine, if there's so many lawsuits come in an area, and the Catholic Church is at risk of getting liquidated to pay off all these people, surely it's far more effective just to sell all that property, get the hell out of that area, and reallocate those assets where these lawsuits can't reach it. So is that what you're saying, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, you would know better. You operate in that world, but liquefy the assets, just make them fluid, get them all over into the right place where they're not going to be touched. I mean, that's, I'm sure, what their lawyers are telling them, right?
Have you heard of George Farmer? Someone's asking.
No.
No. Okay. All right. Next question is: can the military do the arrests?
Certain military. Yeah, I mean, like we say, there's governments who are already committed to have paramilitary. Now, not the regular military, but more like commandos, like my friend Joseph. People are trained in doing this stuff. Not a normal grunt in the army who knows how to pull the trigger, but I mean the commandos who know how to take down people silently and effectively, quickly, right? These are the people who we're relying on. And when the government orders the military to act, they act, right? So that's why it's so encouraging about this developing support we're having, right?
Yeah, we've got almost 3,000 watching live now. So we're here with Kevin. All of his links, his books are in the description. Tons more information in the books. Please support his important work. If you've got any questions, final questions, get them in now. We've got about 15 minutes to the hour. But please keep the questions on the subject. I've had to skip some questions because they weren't on the subject. So here we go. From Osho: does Kevin know anything about secret society oaths to protect fellow members in any and all circumstances? Freemasons, Opus Dei, and others. It would explain the lack of accountability.
Well, accountability is just a word they toss out there. No one's ever accountable in those positions. But you have to make the masses think they're accountable, otherwise they might start questioning, right? But no, in reality, like in the Mormon ritual that everyone does on a Sunday service, they do this thing from a very arcane practice where they show what happens if you inform on the secret practices of Mormons. They go like this. It's kind of like a Freemason thing. The gestures where you're going to get your throat cut, eviscerated, opened up. They show the tortures that'll happen. The Ninth Circle does the same thing. As a matter of fact, Tosin Ianhouse described as a young child, when she was in the Ninth Circle, anyone in the circle who did not immediately cannibalize the child they just killed was themselves immediately killed, their throat cut, and then everybody had to drink their blood. So there's that instant punishment if you don't cooperate because the stakes are so high, right? So that's kind of basic to all cults, right?
So Ms. wants to know about the Knights Templar being welcomed back into the Vatican recently.
I think that's a PR gesture. I mean, don't forget what they did to the Templars. They were getting too rich, and so the King of France and the Pope said, kill them all. And they burned them alive outside Notre Dame, right? Which I thought was kind of a poetic thing. There's a picture I included on the anniversary of the Aboriginal Holocaust Memorial Day. Notre Dame burned. Somebody torched Notre Dame on April 15th, 2019. And I thought, well, that's one for the Templars who were burned outside there. No, they got it in return. But no, I again, you got to kind of look at the source of all that stuff. Say, where's it coming from?
So you mentioned that there's a documentary coming. When will that be released? Darlene wants to know.
When it's done, like when it started, when it might take a while because it'll have a lot of this evidence, but once it's got to be sifted and done in a way that's not going to compromise the lives of people or the long-term work of this court, which, like I say, is part of a bigger struggle to stop this murderous corporatocracy, right?
Christina wants to know, will the United Nations grow teeth and shut these religions down?
It's not teeth that have to grow. It's ludicrous to expect the UN to act. We tried over so many years. The book was written for honest elements within the UN, like indigenous delegates, people who are in NGOs, who are doing good work on the ground, but they're tied into this corporate system. The UN exists to stop these conventions from being enforced. Only twice in the history of the Genocide Convention has it ever been enforced, against Rwanda and Serbia, not against the major Western powers doing these crimes, right? So it's there like the International Court of Justice on all these things to make sure that the big guys aren't indicted and stopped, right? So you can't look to the UN. That's why we're hoping to create these international networks of courts and republics, sovereign republics, which is our answer to that corporate system, right?
Darlene is back with, did all the defendants appear before the court?
No, only two of them were in communication with the court that I mentioned, and Keith Schiller and Gary Patterson. And the rest, and this is a very important legal point, they didn't respond, which means they didn't deny it. They didn't contest it, which means under international or any legal system, it's called a pro confessio admission of guilt. It means, yeah, we agree with you. You know, silence is consent, that idea. Yeah, we agree with you. Yeah, we did all these crimes. They never contested it. And the fact that we did it, that's not the point. Anyone who says something publicly about someone, if they're not answered, it stands as uncontested fact under the law.
Oliver's mom doesn't understand how anyone could get close enough to Trump or King Charles to put them under arrest.
Oh, very easy, actually. These people they're not the little man behind the big mask. They are very vulnerable. That explains their paranoia. And, you know.
Voigan wants to know, hi, Kevin, I love your work. Do you know about the black nobility families like the Orsini, Colonna, Farnese, Borgia, who control the Vatican behind the scenes?
Well, I've heard about that over the years. I know the Orsinis especially are involved directly in trying to shut down our work. For example, they set up a front group called the ITNJ, the International Tribunal on Natural Justice, with Sasha Stone and Robert David Steele, who put out a contract on me, and they were calling for my public arrest and execution. The Orsinis are behind in a big way because they have a direct tie to the Ninth Circle. They help set it up. You see, the Ninth Circle, it's mentioned as far back as the time of the Jesuits, but it's older than that. It's based on old Roman practices of child and animal sacrifice in exactly the same locations, like under the San Lorenzo Church in downtown Rome, the Jesuit headquarters. There's an ancient crypt there that's pre-Constantinian, and these rituals have been going on there for over 2,500 years, right? So they trace a long history of them, especially the Orsinis.
Addy wants to know who presently is the head of the Ninth Circle.
There isn't one head. They have local, or rather regional, I don't even know the names of it, but it's the head of the coven. And when in the court verdict, remember when two of the judges said they deserve the death penalty because they have command responsibility? That's really important. And it's people like the present Pope. Usually the present Bishop of Rome is the presiding head within Rome. But usually it's local cardinals who are the heads in particular areas, like, in Europe, in Asia, other places. We haven't totally mapped that out yet accurately. But command responsibility is the basis on which King Charles I had his head cut off. Because when you're the head of an army or a government or anything, you have the power to stop it, and you don't, and you actively participate. You can't get any guiltier, right? And you then bear personal responsibility. They call it vicarious liability under the law. An employer is responsible for what his employees do. So why isn't the Pope third party in every one of these cases of priests raping children? He should be, if there was a legal system that operated. They're always protected, right? So anyway, that's part of the legal knowledge you need to know, right?
Darlene wants to know when the final verdict will be on the website.
Should be within 24 hours. They're just kind of they're coordinating the release, depending, for security reasons and that. But by tomorrow, there'll be something up at that. You can read the whole thing, murderbydecree.com, under ITCCS updates.
Seago says, is it even possible to uproot such powerful bloodlines that seem to be as old as time? I hope so, but it feels like the deck has always been rigged, and we're playing a game set up for us to lose.
I think someone, I forget who said it, said, history knows neither hope nor despair, but only possibility. And it's in our hands to change that all the time. And we can't be held back by our own despair, because the whole technology and world is set up to make us despair, to make us feel atomized and alone. And I know, working constantly on the ground with people, the goodwill and strength that exists at the base among all of us, we got to start looking horizontally and not vertically, either to an unknown God or to people in authority to save us. It's never going to happen. And it's up to us. So I would put it back on people who feel that. Recover yourself, reclaim ourselves. It's a big discipline we each need to go through. And I know the folks in Albion, they had a great retreat the other day, and a lot of them went out, I don't want to say where, but it's one of these traditional ley line sites in England. And they sat there, and one of the spots they went to was Runnymede, and there's an old elm tree there, and one of these women said she stood at Runnymede and held that tree. And she felt, her ancestors, she's felt the strength of those people who signed Magna Carta. There's such great beauty, in our people, and we got to activate that. And you got to turn off all the electrical stuff, get out in nature, hang out with kids and animals and Mother Earth, and you'll know what to do. It'll teach you what to do. And so I really encourage that for people who are feeling despair, right?
Yeah, my partner's always making me hug trees when we're walking out in the countryside with baby Ziggy. Thanks, David, for the super chat. Another great show. Sean, cheers. And Kenneth wants to know, what's Kevin's view on Druid Christianity and the significance of the British Isles of Britain and Ireland?
I don't know enough about it. I mean, I know the kind of official things about Druidism. I know that in my mom's side, we're descended from O'Neills, who were the last of the High Kings and the Druidic kings. So and when I did that exorcism in Rome and the tornado hit the next day, one of my ancestors in Ireland said, "There you go, Kev. That's our Druid ancestors. They could shapeshift and control the weather. They're acting through you." And I believe that, but it's a whole area that, like Druidism, there was official Druidism created by the British aristocracy. Like when they created the kilt after they conquered the Highlands, you adopt symbols of the conquered culture and then kind of spin it in your way. So you got to be careful when people talk about Druidism, right? Is it really genuine? Did the Druid priests go around slaughtering all those children? Was that Roman propaganda to justify their extermination? Like, who knows, right? But that seed is in our genetic, bloodline, and we have to recover it ourselves. I think everything that those nature-based practices embody, right?
Indeed. Constant wants to know, do you think the local chapters of Masons and Mormons are in on the bigger picture that keeps us from speaking out?
You mean keeps them from speaking out?
I think...
Not sure I understand the way it was phrased.
Aren't these institutions set up as a pyramid where only the people at the top are aware of the big picture, and the masses, like the locals, would not be so involved? I think that's what Constance is getting at.
Yeah, that's generally true. That's the nature of a hierarchy. But I would caution against that because everybody does know. The Crimin policy, where you're silenced and not tell the police and children raped, every priest I know knows about it. They just don't want to talk about it because they'll lose their pension. And it shows you where the life of a child ranks in the scheme of things, in their mind, I guess. But all at the same time, I've known priests quit over that, right? Just like I would have quit if I hadn't been thrown out of the church. Once you learn these things, you can't be associated with it anymore. So it's both, you know. Yeah, people. It's like in a town where corpses were burned over generations, right? Whether it's Nazi occupied Europe or in Canada during the in the death camp residential schools. You can smell a burning body from miles away. It's very pungent, right? And I've done it. I've smelled it. And don't tell me the community doesn't know what's going on when there's bodies being burned. Of course everyone knows. They just don't want to know. And so they erase their memory and bring in false narratives. Like everyone in Canada now believes things are reconciled and happy, with natives. It's just self-deluding stuff you need to live alongside atrocity. And so it's all of that, right?
Yeah, the powers that be have a way of normalizing atrocities to the masses. All right, so Darlene, will the transcript of the hearing be released?
Yes, but like I say earlier, it's got to be vetted and put out in a way that's not going to endanger people or the court.
Mania is asking people to like this video so that it gets shared more. Thank you, Mania. And Adils is wondering, are you aware of a ritual that Charles partook in during the coronation when he was hiding behind the screens?
No. And if you have info on that, send it to us.
Thank you for your hard work, Kevin. This looks like a positive sign towards our kids. Thank you, Darlene. Daughter of Odin. What is Christianity really? A limb, not also the tree. Christianity is an inversion of truth built on violence. That's a fact, yet we make excuses. Anything to add to that, Kevin?
Well, just that as an institution, yeah, it's the most violent religion in history, right? That just look at the body count. That's why it's an inversion of Christ's message. That's why it's the mirror opposite of Christ and his spirit and message.
Unlike other religions, the Jehovah's Witnesses preach a new world order like the Reset UN agenda. Is it because Charles Russell was a Freemason?
I don't know. Good question. I don't know enough about them.
It just seems to be an agenda that's coming together all over the world. All right, so here we go, Mark. Kevin, we always ask on this show, how are you doing yourself? This must have been a momentous few weeks for you. Thanks, man.
It was. Thank you, Mark. It was a real high and a real low for me because I faced attacks. There were some bad incidents that happened, and also just the strength you get from talking to people who've been through these horrible things and are still have the courage to speak about it always lifts me more than anything can. And I had to also go out and that's why I didn't come to Europe right away, because not only help with the American revelations that happened with the court, but we had to do some serious work with some of the shaman I know in Canada, because we were under psychic attack in a big way. One of the people who worked with us killed herself just out of the blue. So I got protection that way too. So I was off the radar for a little while in sweat lodges and doing stuff like that. But fortunately, I had my good buddy Joseph covering my back, and so I got through it. But thank you for asking, and just keep going for as long as you have. What can you do, right?
Mr. Chili is wondering whether these rituals are still happening recently, or is it all evidence from historic crimes?
No, it's a permanent thing happening, and there's always a lag in time between when something happens and when you learn about it. Like this priest who was killed, it was a few years ago, the one in Buffalo. The Ninth Circle evidence has to do with stuff as long ago as the 1990s. The picture of Prevost and the evidence of him, that was at a ceremony in 1978 when he was ordained, but it's a continuity of crime. It never stops. It just changes its location and its appearance, but it's always there.
When a Catholic pastor is comfortable being described as a cult pastor in a press article, would you have any second thoughts on that man?
I don't have second thoughts. I know what they are. All of them. They take an oath, to serve that satanic system. So, I mean, they joke, don't forget that people who think they're saved joke about it all the time, right? That's how we learn things, because they boast about what they can get away with, right?
You were Comey referring to a higher power in his book?
No.
Okay. I think we've zipped through the questions. Let's see, Kenneth. What's the newly introduced change of uniform for the Swiss Guards in the Vatican? Are you hip to that?
No, I don't. Who cares?
Right, we are bang on the hour, Kevin, and we've got all the pertinent questions answered. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
Yeah, just to emphasize the importance of this, and there's going to be a law enforcement coordination around the planet to enforce this, enabling laws passed in different areas to allow these arrests to be made and for these properties and assets to be seized, but also to really emphasize the point, it's part of that bigger struggle, the people versus the corporatocracy. We're in a state of civil war. We've got to get on board now. It's the lives of your children that are at stake, the lives of our people. And it's a system, it's being tried and convicted and condemned. And it's not about individuals, it's about their symptom of the sicker thing that we all have to combat now. And it's a lifelong struggle. Teach your children, because they'll be leading this fight. And we've got to reclaim the world and our beautiful humanity. So let's do it.
And don't forget to support Kevin through his books and his links in the description box. Huge thank you, my friend. If there's any more updates, let us know. We'll get you right on. And you stay safe. Cheers, Kevin.
Thanks. And don't forget, the verdict's coming out tomorrow. Circulate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thank you. Bye. Another phenomenal interview with Kevin, folks. And thank you for all of your questions. I know we were supposed to have Hamamoto back on last night, part 3. On the Charlie Kirk Mormon conspiracy. Well, he's coming back on Wednesday. It was postponed until Wednesday, I think Wednesday at 6 or 7 p.m. As for myself, we've been filming podcasts all weekend, studio ones. We got 2 big Essex Boys case ones. We've also got another ex-police woman. Always fascinating, really graphic though. I won't get into too much detail right now, but all that will be coming out soon. And I'm also on the road doing schools talks, back to doing the schools talks again this week, but I will try and get online when I can. All right, hope you have a great weekend wherever you are in the world. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to go and spend some time with Jen and baby Ziggy.